That
No, never mind.
Welcome, early birds. We will begin the webinar at the top of the hour. If you wouldn't mind, help me test the chat function. Maybe just tell me the city that you're logging in from. Anyone in the audience want to help me test the chat? Just go ahead and type in hello or the city that you're representing today. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you, Jessica. Chat is working. We also have a Q&A function. So if you have a question for our presenter or for any of our panelists, please use the Q&A section. I'll be monitoring that. And we'll start probably in about 2 minutes, it looks like. Jessica, thank you for testing the Q&A. I did get your question. Thank you. Hope everybody's having a wonderful week so far. We've made it to Friday Eve, and you have some great learnings ahead of you this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you're located. All right, we are at the top of the hour, and I welcome everyone to the LBMC Technology Solutions presentation of Journey to the Cloud. The secret sauce is in the change management. And I'm very excited to share our experts today. We have an expert in change management. We have 2 experts in ERP accounting solutions. And so if we go to the next slide, I will introduce the speakers and do a little housekeeping. So first and foremost, if you are here for CPE credits, and many of you are, please note that you must answer all of the poll questions. That's our way of sharing with NASBA that you were present and participating in the webinar. So please be mindful of the poll questions. Secondly, following the webinar, we will be sending out, once the recording has concluded and I get the download from that, we will be sending you an email with 3 things: a recording to the presentation today, the slides that were used in the presentation, and a link to a survey to let us know how we're doing and what we might do better. So be on the lookout for that. Your CPE certificate will come separately, and that's coming from our parent company. They ask that you give it 2 weeks to arrive. It usually arrives much sooner than that, but somewhere between 24 hours and 2 weeks is the window for that to arrive. So having said that, I also want to bring your attention to the Q&A function that we have here with GoToWebinar or Zoom webinar. If you have questions for our speakers, for our panel, please use the Q&A function. And we are very happy to have you with us today. I'm going to start off by introducing Jenny Monahan. She is a third-generation Nashville, Tennessee native. She is a project management professional, a PMP, and a process change management practitioner with 20 years of experience leading business transformations and technology implementations across various industries. Jenny is the project management director for LBMC Technology Solutions, and she leads our team of project managers. Our hybrid implementation model is defined by Project Management Institute, PMI, certified project management team, which has taken the project management body of knowledge, Scrum Alliance, and business analysis body of knowledge and developed a methodology that is the most effective in implementing ERP, Enterprise Resource Management, business and technology solutions. Our implementation teams are focused on our clients' business needs while using our results-driven project management practices and systems lifecycles methodologies. Jenny and her project management team bring the best disciplines and blend of people, process, technology, and data that drives user adoption and delivers value to our clients' business. Our panelists today are Glenn Sharp, who has been with LBMC Technology Solutions for over 17 years as a business system consultant. He came to LBMC with over 15 years experience in the accounting field in positions such as staff accountant, controller, and director of finance in local firms. Over the last 13 years, Glenn has contributed to the success and growth of the Sage Intacct team. Glenn has diversified experience with a variety of industries and has significant experience in healthcare, not-for-profit, and service industries. Glenn's depth of experience in accounting and business process allow him to see how technologies affect companies as a whole, work with all departments impacted by technology, and provide consulting and training on how to use technology to achieve business objectives. Glenn is the product manager at LBMC for the Sage Intacct accounting product and holds multiple certifications in most aspects of that product. Also joining us is Patrick Johnson, who is based in Chattanooga, with nearly 2 decades of expertise in the field of technology and consulting. He currently holds the position of Microsoft Business Central Practice Manager at LBMC Technology Solutions. As the practice manager, Patrick takes on the responsibility of overseeing the implementation, support, and custom development of Microsoft Business Central, ensuring that clients receive top-tier solutions tailored to their specific needs. With a background in Kaizen, lean manufacturing, agile software development, corporate accounting, tax and audit, private equity, and technology automation, Patrick brings a diverse background and experience to his role. He takes a holistic approach to technology solutions, blending people, process, and technology, which ensures customer success. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our experts.
Thank you, Dawn. Welcome everyone today. I just wanted to go ahead and go over our objectives, and if there is something along the way that you have any questions on as we go through our presentation and discussion today, please don't hesitate to add any comments or questions to the chat, and we'll be monitoring those throughout the webinar today. Today, we're going to be introducing you to what organizational change management is, and the value and the benefits realizations around the human side of change. Oftentimes we do focus on the technical side, but we want to make sure that we're taking a holistic view and understanding the impact and how critical these factors are to user adoptions and return on your investment. And we'll be talking about the ways that you can maximize these in a very structured way, including how your folks on your teams play a key role in that transformation, as well as the model for individual change success. Throughout the presentation, we'll be also asking some poll questions. We want to learn more about you and your current situation, and from your perspective, what you're most interested in out of today's session. So let's go ahead and move on into our first poll question.
Great. Here we go. So poll question number 1, which do you think is the most important work stream for a successful implementation? And your choices are people, process, technology, data, and I don't know. So we'll give a few more moments. We'll want to make sure that everybody who is here and wishes to receive CPE credit is participating in the poll. So I'll give you a few moments to complete poll question number 1. And I will be ending the poll. And here are the results. Got 85% say that people is the most important element, followed by process, and then technology.
All right, thank you, Dawn.
You're welcome.
There was no right or wrong answer, but those were great answers, and we're going to dive a little bit into that question. So change management, as we had introduced on the objective slide, is a holistic, structured framework that focuses on the human people side of change. And we want to make sure that you're understanding what it is and how you should be integrating it to your overall business transformation strategy and implementation planning. We don't want to just focus on the technical side of the change and assume that technology is a silver bullet. And so these are important things that you want to be considering as you're ramping up and getting prepared for your transformation and your journey to the cloud. And so we want to cover some key concepts and in the definition of change management and the areas that we'll be covering today. And that includes, first and foremost, when you first get started, it's going to be important to measure your organizational change readiness. We want to understand what your baseline is and how ready the folks are at the beginning. And we will be using that baseline as you poll your employees. Typically, it's not going to be the entire organization, depending on how large your organization is. You may just be polling your middle managers, your executives and middle managers to get that baseline. And it could be a very simple survey. And along the way, you would have milestones where you're measuring their readiness and any potential hidden areas of resistance that you would want to be mitigating as you proceed through your journey. In addition to that measurement of your readiness, you also want to make sure that your leadership has a defined vision and that there's alignment across your leadership. If you are a more siloed organization, this is very important. This step is very important because you want to make sure that your C-suite leaders are aligned with the vision and the direction that you're going. And you're working through any misalignment before we proceed forward into your transformation. Then, of course, your organizational structure and your role impacts. This is where you'll want to take a look at your overall organizational chart and your team members and their roles and responsibilities. When you do change, you're focusing on primarily the reason for your change is to optimize and get more automated, for example, or to improve reporting with consolidated reporting. And so there's going to be business impacts that play into that. And that's the whole reason for your change. And so you want to understand how you're going from that current to future state. And those roles that play into that will be impacted. And so oftentimes when you are vague about those impacts to those roles, folks get uncomfortable, and that's where fear comes in. And so it's very important to take a look holistically at the organization and those impacted roles and making sure that you're connecting with those employees, the why you are changing and what you are changing. And the what includes both people, process, technology, and also data. We'll be talking a little bit about data as well. And so those folks that are being impacted need to understand why we're doing this and what will be impacted and who will be impacted. So that usually is going to be broken down by department. And then those middle managers will be working with their direct reports throughout the transformation journey. And then, of course, we can't forget about culture impacts. A lot of times this is more of the softer organic side of your change, but it can have a significant influence in your overall transformation. And this is where, your organization has tribal knowledge, your values, your beliefs, your norms, your habits. And so we want to make sure we're cognizant of that as well as we work through our change management plan. And then, of course, we've already spoken a little bit about business processes, and we'll get a little bit more into that and those impacts as we progress through our discussion today. But it's important to understand the reason for the change, whether or not you're automating a process, such as like an AP, a workflow, approval workflow, for example. At a high level, you need to understand your current state, because it's very difficult to reach your future state goals if you don't really know where you are today. And so at a high level, what are your current processes? What are your pain points? What are those areas that we're looking to improve, automate, and potentially make data more readily available so you can achieve a better return on your investment and be able to get the data that you need when you need it. And then, of course, everyone going into change, especially if there's a lot of pain points with your current process, everybody comes into it and goes, "Oh, we're ready for the change. We don't need change management. We're ready for this," right? But it's amazing how folks, as they get into the change, you may often see hidden areas of resistance. And this is where that measuring your organizational readiness comes in, is to measure those hidden areas. Now, oftentimes, folks think they're immune to it. And so you just want to be aware that if they are ready and excited to go for the change, and we want to get rid of these pain points, there may be users that along the way, they don't want to give up their Excel file. So if for 10 years, if they've been working in Excel and they're moving to a new system and they have to give that Excel file up or the old way up, it starts to becoming a little bit more personal. And then, of course, there's the change curve. We also refer to this as the valley of despair. The valley of despair can actually impact your overall project plan, your timeline, the duration, the transition duration. So that's where the speed of change comes in. Technology can move much faster than the people in the process. And so we have to be cognizant of the speed of change and make sure that we're pacing it to the needs of your team members. If the risk is, if you do try to rush that, you could end up with missing puzzle pieces in the end. So if you're going from your future state, from your present to future state, and you do it too fast and you push that change too fast for your teams, you will get into your testing activities and even your go live activities, and you may be missing areas within your solution that were not fully vetted by your end users, and you may have resistance and lack of adoption. And then, of course, at the end of the deployment, and once you roll out your new solution, obviously we want to be measuring your benefit realization and making sure that you're getting the ROI. So we talked a little bit about what change management is. And so the value at the end of the day is, once we get through the change, we've deployed the new solution, we are seeing users adopt that solution. There's not a resistance, and they're not falling back. They're not regressing back and using their old habits or old ways. So for example, once you go live, they're working around the system, going back to their Excel file, for example. So we want to make sure that the change sticks and that you're actually seeing the value and the proficiency that you were looking for in your original goals. And this screen outlines the core steps that you're going to be going through when you're ready to make the change. And so we've talked about leadership alignment. That's step one. That's the number one step. We want to make sure the leaders are aligned with the vision across that C-suite. And then, of course, before we kick off the implementation, we want to make sure that the core team is identified, and that would be on your team. That would include the project manager, and we're going to be going through the definition of these roles, these key roles, in upcoming screen. That's going to be the project manager. That's going to be your business process experts, who also can be your change agents, and of course your data owners that are going to be helping you extract data from your system for import into the new system. And then, of course, the business processes, your current to future state. If you don't have those identified, it's a good idea to start identifying those at a high level, so you know going into your implementation areas where we're going to need to be refining your future state desires. And then once we do identify the solution that you'll be going to, whether it be Sage Intacct or our Business Central, we're off to the races. We kick off, and then we want to get the end users and the power users, the folks that are going to be leading and coaching the rest of the team members. We want to get them into the system early, and we want to get their feedback early. And this is where we start getting and building their buy-in at this stage in the configuration reviews. And we definitely want to start building that buy-in. So by the time we get to power user training and train the trainer training, we've already got some champions built into the change journey. And then, of course, once we go into coming out of our training, we're going to be going into end-to-end process testing. And that's where we get the further buy-in of our user testers, and we tune and tweak the system according to the needs of the users and get their acceptance, and then we go live and we are ready for success. So poll question 2.
Okay. What aspects of organizational change management do you find most challenging during technology implementations like cloud migrations? This is multiple choice, so you can choose all that apply. So we'll give it another few seconds here. All right, I'm going to close down the poll. And here are our results. 65% said maintaining employee motivation and engagement, followed by 60% saying aligning employees with project goals. And then it looks like communicating change effectively at 45%, and then both coming in at 30%, gaining leadership buy-in and ensuring employees have the necessary skills. Had 10% saying that other are the most challenging.
All right, thank you, Don. Yes,
You're welcome.
All of these definitely play into your journey. And we'll talk a little bit about the importance of that leadership buy-in. So this is where we explain the definition of those roles that we talked about in the overall change management benefits and value, and the steps that you're going to be walking through. And the sponsor and the C-suite and senior leaders is a very important role. It is where we want to make sure that the leader and the sponsor is going to be the person that's going to be responsible for communicating and supporting your initiative and funding your initiative and championing your initiative. And we want to make sure that that sponsor is active and visible throughout the project, and that they stay engaged with the team. And they're working to build a coalition of sponsors across the executive team, as well as potential middle managers and department managers. They are also very, very busy team members, and so we definitely want to make sure they have an extended coalition of sponsorship support. And then, of course, they also are communicating with the team at a high level, and ensuring that the organization and the impacted users understand, the why the purpose and the why we're making this change. We want to make sure that those sponsors and those employees have trust in those sponsors, and that message is clearly communicated. And most importantly, we'll get in a little bit about this, having a communication strategy that the sponsor is following as well. And along the way, we have milestones where they're communicating with the team, as including the audience of that communication. Are we communicating to the middle managers? Are the middle managers communicating to their employees? That is important to have leadership, vision, and alignment. The project manager is going to be the lead on the client side, who would typically work with us and the implementation teams to ensure that the resources on the employee, the teams and the resources on the employee side are aligned and working their deliverables and activities according to the plan. And they also are working with us to make sure if we have any change impacts that we're getting approval before we proceed with that work. And the people managers are typically going to be your subject matter process experts, and they are also going to be the best folks that are poised to be your change agents. They are familiar with the process, that we can build buy-in a lot faster with those middle managers, and they can help champion and coach the other team members and employees. And the employees that report to those middle managers trust those supervisors to help them do their job. And so it's going to be a very critical role in that during the actual user reviews, during the training, the train the trainer training, as well as the user acceptance testing. The data owners are a very key role as well, and they support the project team with extracting that data for import into the new system. And there could be some shared roles across one person, but it's a very key area to be aware of. An often hidden role within change management is human resources, and they can actually help you. Your human resource department can help you across the organization roll out your change initiatives, as well as with your communication strategy. All right, Dawn, poll question 3.
Okay. Little navigation issue, but here we go. Poll question number 3. Which of the following best describes your role in the organization? So are you in the C-suite or a senior business leader? Are you on the departmental level as a manager or supervisor? Are you on the IT side of the house as either a manager or the IT lead? And are you a project manager or a change management practitioner or other? Jenny, you might be the only change management practitioner here.
I feel special.
I'll give this a few more moments. All right, just a couple more seconds. Give everybody a chance to weigh in. And here are our results. So it looks like the majority of our audience is other, followed by C-suite or senior business leader. Then we've got project managers on board, as well as department managers, supervisors, IT managers, and leads. And I was right. You are the only change management practitioner here.
So I'm curious what other is. It's got me curious. So you're going to have to chat if you're an other. All right, poll question 4.
All right. And in your opinion, as an attendee, what is the biggest roadblock to successful cloud adoption in organizations like yours? And this is multiple choice. You can select all that apply. And if you did want to use the chat to let us know what exactly your role is, I'm sure that Jenny and Patrick and Glenn would, just appreciate it, and we can better hone our message to where you are in the organization. Give it a few more moments here. Closing down the poll. Last chance. All right. And here are the results. The big 3 are security concerns, resistance to change, integration challenges. And that's followed by lack of expertise and budget constraints, And then we have a handful saying other.
Thank you, Don. And of course, if you answered other on poll question 4, feel free to add any additional detail referencing poll question 4 with that other. We are actively looking at your responses so we can address some challenges that you might be experiencing. All right, let's talk a little bit about the model for successful change. And in the opening definition of change management, we talked about change happens one individual, one employee at a time. And so it's important to know once the vision is established, we want to be working with the middle managers, department managers, and also our change agents, one and the same, and or they're delegating with potentially the subject matter process experts to help be the change agents across the teams. We're building awareness at that level, and we're also building awareness down through those middle managers to the employees. And the employees and individuals on the teams and across the organizations, they need to know why we're changing. What's the purpose of the change? An example of that would be, we need to move from an old legacy system that's been around for 15 to 20 years, and we have some pain points. We need to get some automation built into the process. We need better consolidated reports, for example. We need to automate processes such as I had mentioned the AP process. So we have some pain points that we need to address, and we need to grow the team. Perhaps we are expanding our organization, and we need to scale and grow that system. And so based off of that why, we move on to the desire, and that is building and making sure the team wants to participate and support the change. What's in it for them? And oftentimes those triggers are, incentives that managers and leadership can build into the team. Perhaps maybe making their process easier. A lot of those pain points that may be the driver of this change may benefit that employee. And then, of course, knowledge. How are they going to change? We'll talk a little bit more about that, and that's where training comes in, and train the trainer comes in. And then, of course, ability. The importance of this is that they need to be able to demonstrate and practice, like a dress rehearsal, the desired skills, and be able to work comfortably and well and successfully within the system before we actually go live. I liken it to the dress rehearsal because we want to practice that before we go live. So when we go live, everyone's comfortable with the process and the system. And then, of course, reinforcement. We want to make sure we sustain that change. Once we go live, we don't want folks to regress back to the old ways and start working around the new process and system. And it's important to understand with the model of success here that folks can slip backwards. So we talked a little bit earlier about the moving from your current to future state. And when that valley of change or that change journey, and if you get stuck in those valleys, and there's the valleys and ups and downs, and if that timeline starts to extend due to some resistors that you're experiencing across the organization, it can cause folks to regress. So if for example, if a 6-month implementation starts bleeding into a 8-month or 9-month implementation, someone that's really had really good, and they're aware of they want to make the change, they support the change, and then if things start slipping and dragging out, they can start losing trust and start fearing the change, and they may regress back. So we want to be cognizant of that along the way. All right, Dawn, poll question 5.
Let's get that launched. For our audience, so which aspect of change management do you believe has the most significant impact on user adoption during technology implementations? And this is a single choice question. So we've got effective communication, leadership support, training and skill development, employee engagement strategies, measurement of result, and other. Okay, I'll give this a couple more seconds. And let's share the results. So we've got effective communication in the pole position, followed by training and skill development, then leadership support, measurement of result, and employee engagement strategies. And we've got another.
Okay, thank you, Dawn.
Yep.
All right. To wrap up this portion of our discussion, I wanted to show the team here how we're integrating and in parallel with the technology, what an example of what your plan could look like. And so we have our technology plan, and we want to overlap it and integrate it with your internal change management activities. And this shows you how we would could approach that. And so in the top half, I'm going to walk through the slide so you understand the visual here. And so the first thing that we start from a technical perspective is we start with the foundation of your house, and that would be your chart of accounts. And then the chart of accounts design, and including inputs into what your reporting requirements are. Those go hand in hand. So we want to make sure that we're designing that foundation of that house to meet the needs of those reporting requirements. And then once we get that defined, then we move into our configuration and user reviews. And we talked a little bit about that in the beginning. And those user reviews are really important because that's where we start building that buy-in with the team. And we need to be working with those core middle managers and process owners during this phase to make sure that we have all the right stakeholders involved to ensure that we're validating that buy-in in preparation for other dependent activities such as training and system testing. And once we get a master data imported, we're ready to proceed forward and get some initial training scheduled, as well as making sure that we have alignment with our third-party vendors. So that this may or may not apply to your situation, but this could be an AP vendor. It could be a sales tax vendor such as Avalara, depending on what areas in the process that we may need to fill with any third parties to complete your solution. The red line indicates the critical path. We have dependencies along the way that we need to be accounting for to ensure that we have planned appropriately so we can mitigate any roadblocks or impediments with those critical path dependencies so we don't have delays in the overall plan. And then, of course, once we get through our training and testing activities, then we get it to the end of the project life cycle, and we get a go, no go, and then we're ready to go live. And 30 to 45 days after we go live, we support and make sure the system is stable before we transition to ongoing support. So where does change management activities come in? How do we integrate the two? And so the bottom part of the slide shows you how we would build the awareness across the team and when we would do that, when we would actually explain the why, and we would have a communication strategy about all these milestones. And we would be working with the C-suite leader to make sure that they're communicating these things and working with the middle managers, so we get this communication out early and not be managing that communication plan in an ad hoc way, so folks know what's coming and they're prepared for what's coming, and it's not a surprise 2 weeks before you go live. Hey, we got a new system, we're going live in 2 weeks. We want to make sure we're giving folks ample time to work and prepare for that change. And so once we get the why built up, obviously the core team is going to want to be aware of why they're changing before you actually kick off your implementation. There have been situations where we're kicking off implementation, and some folks on the call didn't even know that it was coming. It was just they're in a kickoff and they're like, "What's going on?" So preparing the core team before that kickoff is key. And then, of course, building the what's in it for them, that happens organically over several weeks. And you can actually start building that before we kick off. And that's probably one of the more slippery areas with that change management framework, the individual change framework, because that really varies down to the individual. And you oftentimes may have to find incentives to actually drive that desire and want to support the change. And then, of course, knowledge starts. It can start as early as those user reviews. So once we start getting the folks into the user reviews and building that buy-in, and as they see the system organically be built, we're building that buy-in. We're preparing for those training activities with those power users who are going to be our train the trainers. And that's where knowledge comes in. And so that's going to align with our user reviews. That's going to align with our power user training activities. And then coming out of training, then we have ability. And that's where we do that dress rehearsal that I compared it to. So we're making sure that the team from the end-to-end process can work through that, a dress rehearsal, multiple dress rehearsals, depending on the different types of processes the team is testing. And that could vary across teams to make sure that we have that cross a team synergy in that process, in that user acceptance testing. Once we get through that, we have a go, no go before we deploy the system. And then, of course, that's where reinforcement comes in after go live. So we want to make sure folks aren't regressing back to their old ways. And so you may have seen or experienced that in the past with some of your, if you've been through a change or a like change, it's not unheard of that folks will work around it. And the reason why that may happen is not that people are trying to sabotage per se the deployment or your initiative. They're just doing what's comfortable to them and what they know. And so we want to try to mitigate that during that post go live, and then months on into the optimization and ongoing support. All right, Dawn, poll question 6.
You guys getting tired by the poll questions? Because you've been sharing some great information with us. What is the current stage of your organization's cloud adoption journey? Are you exploring options? Are you in the planning stages? Are you actually implementing? Or are you already fully on the cloud? The final choice is we're not considering cloud adoption. So as you look at those choices, we'll give you a few more minutes for everybody to get in and answer. Just a few more moments. Seeing a little bit of movement in the answers. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. It looks like there's a lot of planning and exploring options, but we've got the other half of the room is either in the midst of implementing or already fully on the cloud. And I'm happy to see that there are no respondents for we are not considering cloud adoption, because at this point, I'm not sure how cloud adoption could be avoided. So those are your survey results.
Great, thanks, Dawn. For those that answered exploring options, feel free to add any additional details or questions that you may have for us and the panelists on the call. And we will certainly try to address any questions that you have in our upcoming section. All right, so here we are, drum roll. So guys, get on your, yeah, okay, so I just want to make sure your videos are on. So this is part 2 of our discussion. I would like to welcome Patrick and Glenn to the discussion. And I'll be the moderator for part 2, and we're going to be hopping through some of our questions for Patrick and Glenn, and we want to talk a little bit about the recipe to that secret sauce that we've been mentioning, and from our experience, those use cases around these areas. And so we're going to start with leadership first. And so, how in these use case examples and scenarios that we'll be talking about, how did the customer leadership alignment and sponsor participation benefit the transformation and the implementation, including did they or did they not build a coalition of sponsors? Were they active and visible throughout the implementation? If they were, what positive impacts did it have? If they were not, what risks did you encounter throughout that implementation? I'll go ahead and start with Patrick.
Yeah, so afternoon, everybody. In my experience, I've kind of seen a blend of all of those, and maybe somewhere in the middle, right? So if you have successful engagement from the top down within any of these projects, you're going to see a lot more success, because then you can have somebody in an executive or a C-suite leadership position that can help you make decisions, as well as, maybe engage or excite the team members that we really don't have the ability to do so. I think I can think back on a couple examples where that C-suite members had to make a hard decision around what do we want to do as a company, right? And there was maybe, I don't want to say dissenting, but maybe varying opinions at the management level, at middle management, right? So you really need somebody at that top level to really be engaged, understand what the system is being configured to do, what it can do, but also has that vision downstream to really understand what they want to do long-term within their organization, and then help your technology partner and internally drive that forward. And then you'll see a lot more buy-in. And I'll maybe talk about what happens when that doesn't happen. Nothing is worse than coming to a crossroads within the implementation and that C-suite member getting a question of, what are we going to do? And they say, I don't know, because I don't know what we're talking about. So, when you work with this, it's really top down and bottom up. But you really need somebody at that top level to be really engaged, understand the process, understand the people involved, and then help your technology partner and internally steer the project and help make decisions.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Glenn?
Yes, I definitely agree with what Patrick said. It's definitely a big difference in implementations when you have that executive leadership that is involved and is active during that implementation. So there's a lot fewer surprises. You can get things addressed much more quickly than you can otherwise. Sometimes you see organizations where that does not happen. And if that previous slide that Jenny was discussing where the awareness to the team doesn't happen, and you have someone who's in executive leadership who decided to, purchase a new system or something and didn't inform the other people, but then the other people are expected to implement it. That is a recipe for, a very tough implementation because it's new to them, this thought. They're not exactly sure what the direction is. So when you have that executive leadership, that makes a big difference, throughout the project, as Patrick mentioned, of making some tough decisions that sometimes have to be made throughout the project. But also, if that leadership, a part of that awareness, I think, is the C-suite listening to those who are actually will be doing the transactions, doing the activity, those underneath them, because many times they really do not know how they are doing the job, how they are accomplishing what they're accomplishing. So it is usually an eye-opening experience for the leadership to be involved, to actually know what current workflows are in place, so they can make decisions on maybe being more streamlined in their operations. And so as they're putting in a new system, they can make a lot better decisions as far as the direction of their company and the future of the company as well.
All right, thank you, Glenn. So let's talk a little bit more about people. So we've talked about the C-suite, the leaders. So let's talk a little bit about the middle managers and train the trainers, the coaches, as well as the end users, depending on your scenario here. How has having the right people in the right seat during your transformations and or not impacted the technology and the use of that technology in any of the scenarios? Pick one. And with that said, if you could discuss what positive impacts were made having the right folks, and then any risks when you had some potential role gaps. And we'll start with Patrick.
Yeah. I'm going to use something from personal experience. I was an end user for a long time before I jumped in here. I did these implementations as an end user. I used to manage warehouses, and we were rapid implementing an instance of a new ERP. Not being involved in that discussion around scope and requirements around what I needed for me and my staff to effectively use the system was pretty detrimental to the overall success. But later on in my career, having done a few more, having somebody who can not just communicate from a technical perspective, but also just boots on the ground. And that doesn't have to be a warehouse employee. It could be an AP clerk, is really going to be able to help shape the overall success of the platform, because, as Glenn was mentioning, right, they're doing it day to day. I'm hoping that your CFO is not having to reconcile like open AP on a regular basis, but they're also going to understand from a day-to-day perspective, what does this person need? How can I provide them better tools? And if you're really not placing them in the right seat, even in the implementation, but even day to day, you're really just setting yourself up for a struggle.
Thank you, Patrick. Glenn?
Yes, definitely evaluating where your team is at and what they are capable of is definitely part of this, because as we mentioned previously, there's some decisions that have to be made, or there's some business processes that you have to discuss. If you have someone who's in the position, but they don't really comprehend the accounting impact of some of the decisions that are being made, then that can really, be detrimental to, the processes that is being put in place. And so it's good to know who that team is, and what their skill set is, what their background is. Are they going to understand the concepts that are going to be coming from these different modules and avenues that are being implemented, and do they have the skill set to really understand what's going on? That's very important. And then, as I would agree with what Patrick said as well, making sure you're involving the people that it is going to affect in the process, as well as the testing for that. Lots of times during an implementation, you may have someone who's involved who's resistant to change. And whenever that is the case, it's good to have that person on some of the testing, because that is someone, if you can please them, if you can get them excited about the new system by offering new features and capabilities that they don't currently have, then you know that you've made an impact on the whole team if you're able to reach that one person.
All right, thank you, Glenn. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of the business process. What is the value, or was the value, having a high level understanding of the business process, current and future state defined going in prior to going into the implementation? And what were the risks if the customer did not have that defined? We'll start with Patrick.
Well, I think I've probably seen the gambit of this in my career. I'll start from the most positive, right? When you have an organization that really understands how they do business, and it doesn't necessarily have to be constrained to a technical perspective, right? Like, we don't have to be talking about systems, but the how do I process? How do I deal with my customers? How do I integrate with my vendors, right? Understanding how you do that through a process, if you can map it, that's you're 105% ahead of the change curve there. If you can map it, you're going to help not only make future state decisions about where you want to make modifications to that or refinements, but it also helps people like your technology partner look for the ability to automate. It also gives us the ability to maybe provide you with better tools, because as you go through this, you're going to start to define not only the what do we do, but what do we want to do. And if you come to the table with, well, I'm not sure, things happen and we close the month at the end of every month, you're going to struggle through the discovery process of understanding what you can really accomplish with any kind of solution, technology or different. I've seen people do both. I will tell you, those people that come to the project prepared with that information and that knowledge are leaps and bounds more successful through the implementation process than long term, because they really have a vision of what they're doing and how they want to do it.
Thank you, Patrick. Glenn?
Yeah, I think that this is very key, and this is something that can be done prior to engaging with an implementation partner. It's very common in many companies that they have no idea really what happens between the different departments. Once a sales team gets a signed contract, what happens after that? They don't really know, what happens in the system. So having that documented, as Patrick mentioned, having a workflow designed out for that, if you have that ahead of time, that is a huge help in your implementation process. If you do not have that, that will have to be discussed, will have to be planned out, so you can make sure that those processes are within the new system, or as Patrick mentioned, if we can find ways to be more efficient in the workflow, or bypass things in the workflow possibly, then that's what we need to know. But we will be trying to find that information. So if you have that documented ahead of time, you will be way ahead as far as your implementation process.
Thank you, Glenn. While we're on this topic, for the benefit of the audience, what level of detail is expected in this stage, defining at that current and future state? In other words, is it necessary to get down to that transaction level? We'll start with Patrick.
I think you at least need to have, and then I'm going to revert back to the right people in the right place. You need to have somebody who understands the process, and not only understands it, but communicates well, both from a written and a verbal perspective, because they need to be able to come to the table during the course of any kind of effort, not just an implementation, and really communicate what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. either current or future state. They also need to be able to effectively communicate pain points without just throwing their hands up and saying this hurts or this is bad. And that's a portion of process, right? Because we're in the process of trying to help you resolve these issues through technology. Being able to effectively communicate what those are is a huge effort, but also a huge benefit to anybody, not just your technology partner, but internally as well, because maybe that pain point's been buried through years of experience, right? I hear well, it's the way we've always done it. It's hard, but that's how we do it. I hear that a lot during the course of implementations or engagement with clients. And being able to effectively communicate not just that this hurts or this is bad, but I would really like to be able to, and then fill in the blank, is a wonderful solution. They can provide you through the course of implementation, but also just process refinement internally.
Mm-hmm. And and the input into that high level, process definition is obviously pain points, and obviously, the core competency areas, we're not talking about, documenting your GL process here. We're talking about identifying those areas where you may have, unique needs, such as your AP approval process. Who are the managers that need to be approving that process, and getting some of those unique areas that are to your business more better defined going into your implementation. So we have input into that during the configuration design. Glenn, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll say, as we've been discussing, these processes, a lot of times in companies, they don't have the skill set to do that. And that's how, having an implementation partner like LBMC Technologies is a benefit, because we've been through those processes, seen many of them. We can usually help someone go through that process and kind of identify those things. And as far as it being high level or detailed, it sometimes just depends on the process or on the workflow that we're talking about, to what level of detail that we want to get down to. So that's kind of where an implementation partner can benefit, can help your team go through that process and identify those areas for improvement.
Right.
And I'll maybe interject something real quick. I'll tell you right now that those people don't always have manager at the end of their title. Putting those people in a place where they have some level of engagement with the project is actually going to help you see a lot of success downstream. So if you can actually get more of your downstream employees engaged in the actual implementation or the conversion process, you're going to see a lot more buy-in from bottom up.
Yeah. Letting them have input into that process definition, and identifying those pain points is definitely going to increase your user buy-in for sure. Thanks, Patrick. Don, we're ready for poll question 7.
Wonderful. So what is your primary goal for attending this webinar today? Learning about successful change management, improving technology adoption within your organization, discovering and exploring potential technology solutions, networking with industry experts, or other.
And for those other, if anybody selects other, I would definitely love to hear more in chat about what the other is, including if you want to learn more about change management resources.
Absolutely. So I'll give this about 10 more seconds to give everyone a chance to jump in and answer. All right. And here are our results. Over half of the audience wants to learn about successful change management. And the other was discovering and exploring potential technology solutions. And then coming in beneath that were both other. So please, if you answered other, share in the chat with us. And then improving technology adoption within my organization.
Thank you, Dawn. All right. We'll carry on through our recipe and use cases for that secret sauce. And so we're going to hit on those 5 key areas within the individual change that we talked about. And that includes the awareness, the what's in it for me, the desire, the knowledge and the training, as well as practicing and showing the ability during the user acceptance. And then, of course, after we go live, the benefits realization. So we'll start with awareness. Glenn, I'm going to pick on you first.
Yeah, sure.
Did users, employees know what was coming? And if they talk about both sides of the coin there,
Yeah.
what happened when they did know, and the benefits, and what were the risks if they did not?
Yes, I think this ties back, to our leadership question as well. Whenever, that awareness has been done prior to the engagement, and so that the team knows what's coming, that knows what they're trying to solve for. That's definitely those types of implementations. It's easier to get everyone on board more quickly as you go through that process. Whenever we've had implementations where maybe someone did not know, like was mentioned, they don't know why they're on the kickoff call or what was going to happen. Those are always difficult because, for one, they're not mentally prepared, obviously, for that, which they're not going to be able to provide the thought through answers that's needed. In order to kind of improve some workflows and things like that. So having that awareness is very important for that. And definitely there's a difference between teams that, are cohesive and are aware of what they're there to accomplish, and those that are not.
Thank you, Glenn. Patrick?
I would say a lot of this has to come down to consistent messaging too, right? Not just the communication, the consistent messaging from top down and bottom up. I'm going to give a little advocation for ops employees, right? Not everybody has an email address. You definitely want to make sure that you're having continual conversation throughout the organization. Nothing is worse than going live day one and then throwing a scanner in a warehousing guy's hand and saying, good luck. Let me know if you have questions. You've really got to keep people involved. You have to keep that constant line of communication. And sometimes it's a, hey, we're delayed by a week, or hey, we were delayed by a month, right? Every employee really needs to know, at least at a high level, what the status of each of these project milestones are, and then have continuous and cohesive communication throughout the organization and interdepartmentally, right? The sales team needs to know what customer service is working on. The accounting team, for lack of a better term, needs to know what everybody's doing, because they have to report on it, and are responsible for the financials. So, a lot of that awareness boils down to that communication, like Glenn was talking about.
Yeah. Great points, Patrick. This all ties back to when we were talking about the definition and steps within the framework. We talked about that communication plan, that strategic change management plan. And so this is where the sponsor would be working with, and the C-suite leaders would be working with those middle managers to define at what points along the way they would be communicating to different groups of employees. And so that could be before the solution is selected, because, you want some folks involved in that. And what's that communication channel? What's the communication format? Is that an email? Don't laugh, Glenn and Patrick. Email may not be the best format for some of these messages. While email does have its place, it may be a live webinar with that C-suite, with across the organization, saying, we've got this change coming, and this is why we're doing this, and acknowledging, that there's going to be areas where the team is going to need to work together to get through these things. There's going to be times where, there's going to be some challenges along the way, and we're all creatures of habit. So acknowledging the reality of the initiative. And so you've got email, you've got newsletters, you've got webinars, you've got pre-recorded webinars even. And if you're interested in getting support with how you shape that communication, please chat that in the chat, and we'll definitely follow up with you on any interest in that area.
I do have one other thing that comes to mind during the discussion.
Yeah.
You know, we all find ourselves in a new workspace. Jenny, Glenn, and I are all in 3 different cities in Tennessee right now. You might find yourself where you have employees who are hundreds of miles away from you or in different time zones. You might also be in an environment that has multiple locations. You might have offices in 3 or 4 different cities. You definitely want to make sure that that awareness is geographic agnostic, right? You want to make sure that everybody has the same level of awareness across your organization and not just maybe the home office, right?
No, that's a great point. And there may be some more sensitive impacts on potential roles and responsibilities that, that communication channel may need to be face-to-face, for example. I didn't mention the face-to-face. Let's talk a little bit about desire and what's in it for me. What benefits and risks have you experienced where employees were motivated to participate and wanted to support the change, and vice versa? We'll start with Patrick.
Oh, I'll use some really recent communication from a client. You know, we're working with an AP clerk on AP automation. She looks at what was, you know, a 55 hour a week effort. And through, you know, communication and a technology solution, we reduced her workload significantly. You know, but that's also a value add to her manager and the CFO when we look at overhead. So the what's in it for me might be you know, this makes my job easier, or maybe I have better visibility of data, right? Like I don't have to go spend 3 hours digging through SQL queries to try to get just a quick answer, right? And really a lot of that too is effectively understanding what that motivation is for each employee. Because it's going to be different person to person, right? Some people want their jobs to be easier. Other people want to be able to work from their phone. Someone wants to be able to work from home once a week, right? You really need to work with your employees and your staff to understand what that motivation is. And then, you know, working with like a technology partner, or even internally, figure out how can you provide that, or how can you communicate effectively.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Glenn?
Yeah, I think, you know, as far as desire is concerned, you know, a lot of people, of course, they want to know how it's going to benefit them. But I found in many instances when working with clients, and this goes back to kind of the process, if someone can identify, most people feel like they are kind of siloed by themselves. They do what they're doing just within their, you know, AP or something, or AR, and they kind of think that's their world, that's the whole world. But when they realize how and explain to them how they fit within the larger realm of things, and I've had situations where, you know, I was able to tell someone, was like, well, if you would just process that this way instead of this way, you would save this person over here, you know, a lot amount of time. And they were more willing to do that because they didn't realize what an impact, you know, that a decision that they made to do something one way, it really affected the person who was on down the line. And so, you know, whenever those things are explained to them, going back to process and how they fit into that, the wheel of things as it goes, then I think it becomes very effective for them as well.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. So let's move on to knowledge and training. What training approach have you used, and how critical was it knowing how critical was it knowing how to change for those train the trainers and downstream the end users that they were training, and how did it impact their implementation? We'll start with Patrick.
Oh, I'm going to use a really big word that I like. Kinesthetic learning. It's you have to touch it to know it, right? I've seen employees struggle with the watch me do it and then you do it. They really have to touch the system. They have to touch whatever they're doing to be able to understand how they're going to move forward through that process. And, I'm going to go back and reference one of Jenny's previous slides. That's part of what we would call user acceptance testing, or, smoke testing the system to make sure everybody is aware and trained. They've got to get in there and they've got to do it. You can't do 2 sales orders a week and then expect somebody to hit the ground running on day one. They've really got to get in there. And I've seen people do things from reserving an entire conference room as a classroom, and we would do day-to-day training with huge groups, all the way down to, can we come on site and help you through a specific hurdle that you're having? Some people just really strive to have that human presence, right? That one-on-one engagement, to be able to ensure that they feel, that you understand them and that you're there with them and understand it, and then can resolve the issue for them. I would say that knowledge portion is really just not just a validation, but understanding how somebody learns and then providing them tools to do that well, and then validating that they do know it. You don't want to just be checking boxes. You want knowledge experts at the end of these implementations. And seeing the gambit of success or non-successes through that, those people that are actively engaged, getting in the project, touching it, they're usually very successful day one. Those that are getting it a week before you go live are going to struggle.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Glenn?
For me, I try to let clients know that really training starts at the very beginning. I usually, even during the kickoff meeting, many times encourage the those on the call from the client to start keeping a list by their desk of activities and things that they do. And this, of course, ties into some of the testing as well, but make sure that they know what they need to know how to do. There may be one process they do once a month. And so as we go through the months of an implementation, they can, if they have a list, they can kind of refer to it. It's like, oh yeah, I need to make sure I know how to do that in the new system. And so that kind of helps them to identify, especially the things that they are responsible for. And so when they go into training, they kind of know, all right, from this training, I need to know how to do this. And so that sometimes helps direct the training as well, to make sure that we have those processes discussed, and so that we know exactly what those are going to be and how they're going to solve for those. And that's usually kind of, I think it's kind of goes throughout the project. And then training can be as effective as the people are engaged in it. Sometimes you try to make it engaging, but I think whenever you go on site, it definitely is more engaging than doing it over the internet, over the web. But sometimes that's what people desire. But so there's different ways to do that. But trying to get people engaged in the process of that is kind of key to doing the training and making it successful.
One other thing about that too is training doesn't stop when you go live.
Right.
You have got to adopt a continual training process, because hopefully your organization is going to grow and you're going to onboard new employees. Those people who were subject matter experts and engaged throughout the project are hopefully going to train those downstream new employees. So knowledge and documentation and training have got to be something you adopt long-term throughout the life of your organization, because it never stops.
Yeah, the critical, post go live and up several months down the road, that's where your hypercare internally with those train the trainers and internal coaches and champions can definitely benefit the team. Okay, thank you. All right, let's talk a little bit about, oh, sorry guys, I didn't mean to move forward. Let's talk a little bit about user acceptance and adoption. And this is where the ability comes in to the process. What was the value of the UAT system acceptance testing? And how did doing that dress rehearsal and running those processes and transactions impact the customer implementations? And I want you to talk both about the benefits of and the pauses of when that happened well and when it could have been better. And we'll start with Glenn.
I would almost tie the completeness of someone doing the user acceptance testing to the success of their implementation, because when people do not do their user acceptance testing during the testing time period of the implementation process, that means they're going to be doing testing once they go live if they did not do it beforehand. And testing on a live system is not what you want to do. This becomes especially important whenever you have an integration involved within the system. Those integrations have to be tested, thoroughly tested, and then every scenario of that integration has to be tested. And that's needs to be more mandatory on those user acceptance testing. Some people think that they can rush through it, or that it's not really that necessary because, you know, they think that they pick up things very quickly. But then once they, you know, get to using the system in production, it's a kind of a rude awakening that, oh, these things don't work as well as we thought, or we thought this was going to post differently. And that user acceptance testing time is a time where you're working out some of those things. You know, maybe what was decided at the beginning of how to set up a certain way something posts in the system was changed, you know, as it goes forward. And so that's the time that you're testing those things and making sure that everything's flowing into the right places. So every time that is not done, that implementation usually has issues because the person is not doing it. And then, you know, they may tell us they've done it and not done it, or they just, you know, did not do it, but it definitely has a big effect on the success of the implementation.
Yeah, good points, Glenn. And, you know, I had referred earlier about that puzzle, you know, the missing puzzle pieces going from the, you know, the current to the future state. And when you said, you know, when some of those processes aren't tested, you end up with a jigsaw puzzle with a piece or two or more missing, you know, within your process. And it could definitely be a challenging situation to mitigate in your production and live environment. Thanks, Glenn. Patrick?
I'm going to make a blanket statement that UAT is the most important phase of your engagement. Everything up until that point is conceptual and configuration and maybe a little bit of development and integration. But the UAT phase of any engagement is your checkpoint and validation that not only does the system work the way you would expect it to, but do your users know how to use it in that way? You know, we put a lot of emphasis on ensuring that each individual user responsible for that is signing off on that process, and we help guide them through that. This is the gatekeeper stage of every implementation of a go live or not, right? If you can't complete UAT, you have got to circle back and figure out, is it the lack of engagement? Is it a scope gap in the platform? Is something broken? This is really where your team has got to be most engaged during the process. Through configuration, you'll find yourselves in siloed groups, but during UAT, you really start to see the cohesive final product of whatever technology solution you're working in. And this is where you're ultimately working towards. I think everybody's trying to get to go live. We're trying to get you to UAT as fast as we can so that we can ensure that as we've done our due diligence and jobs and everybody internally has been involved, that they can now validate that through actual functional use of the system. And if they are just going through the motions and doing the bare minimum, it really becomes evident when you go live and support ticket starts flowing in. You can start looking back through the UAT log and saying, well, you know, I don't pick on Jenny. I can see Jenny didn't do much at all, but the bare minimum. And then you can see those people that were really go-getters and actually validated everything, asked questions, and then processed transactions or whatever their job role might require. Those people are usually the most successful and have fewer questions and are the biggest adopters of the product long term. Yeah.
And this is definitely, I agree with that. You know, Patrick, you know, if you're not building adoption, and this is, you know, in the change journey and each individual's change, if you're not getting that adoption at this phase, you're going to run into problems at go live, because you need to have that adoption pretty solid coming out of UAT. You don't want to be too fuzzy with that at go live, because you will have risks and impacts to your overall deployment. And you had also mentioned too, I want to go back to the dress rehearsal, right? Can you imagine, if Broadway didn't get through their dress rehearsal, what the live play would look like? That would be a funny play. So going back to that analogy, it's important for the team to have that opportunity to run through the process in the dress rehearsal to ensure that they're ready to go live and go live on Broadway, right? I wanted to tie in with that said, on the topic of user acceptance testing. What was the benefit of having the business processes at a high level documented as inputs into the user acceptance test scripts? And how was that a recipe for success? And on the flip side, what are the risks if there were gaps within and understanding within the process going into UAT? We'll start with Glenn.
When those processes are identified, I mean, that is what you can use and would use for your UAT testing as far as your test scripts. And that helps you validate what was said and what the process is. That lets the implementation partner know what to implement, and that way you can validate those things step by step as you go through that, and make sure that everything is in alignment. When you don't have that, if someone doesn't know what their process is, your implementation partner is doing the best they can to to do best practices for what they have received, and making the system work for them, but it may not be optimized for their situation because they're not able to communicate what their process needs to be or what their process actually is. And that does come up sometimes. Someone does not have the skill set to communicate exactly what their needs are. And so you're trying to accommodate them as best as you can. You're trying to make sure that, they're understanding the risk of, doing things each way, so they can kind of gauge what is the best path for them. But if they're not sure about those things, then sometimes you do have to kind of revisit them a little bit later. As Patrick mentioned, it's an ongoing training process. Things can be changed after you go live once they kind of get into the system. If they did not do the user acceptance testing properly, or once they get into the system, then they may realize what their workflow is. And then maybe that needs to be adopted, and it needs to be readdressed for that, or take a step back, and then make some changes before they go live. So having that process identified is very much a big value to the whole implementation.
Yeah. Thanks, Glenn. And another a risk factor there is that it could extend your system testing phase. If there are a lot of decisions that are not well understood, additional time may needed to work through that, depending on the risk impact. If it's a go no go situations, for example, it could definitely impact your schedule and your go live date. Patrick?
I'm going to use an anecdotal phrase. But how am I going to? Right, and then fill in the blank. I think I've heard that a couple times throughout this career. You'll get to this phase throughout the course of any kind of engagement, and someone will come out of the woodwork with well, how am I going to? I do this like once a month, and it's critical to my job or to the business. Helping define that preemptively throughout discovery, or through your process flow and your pre-discovery, right? Because some of this is, the more prepared you come to the engagement, maybe the smoother your implementation is going to go, or the smoother your process is going to go internally as far as modifications to process and change. If you've scoped those initially, it's very, very beneficial. However, if you're trying to rescope at UAT, in some cases, it can be a tremendous effort to maybe reconfigure a system, or modify data, or redefine a process. Because just like a business, the ERP has a lot of dependencies through it, right? So if you make a complete change to maybe an accounting structure, there might be downstream implications that touch every portion of the system. So having those defined up front and then working with your partner to understand what those might be, and then being able to effectively communicate them is paramount for any kind of system testing and then go live.
Yeah, thank you. And, to add to that, I use the analogy. I love my analogies, as you can tell. Building the house, you had mentioned the chart and the reports. And that's just so important, in the beginning of the implementation. And we kind of showed that in that summary timeline. That's the foundation of the house. I mean, can you imagine building a house without a complete foundation? So your sample reports are really key, making sure that we're aligning and building that chart, the chart of accounts, that foundation to support that. Because if we discover, later in the implementation, whether it be training or in testing, that chart wasn't, that foundation wasn't built right, then in some cases, we have to tear it down and rebuild it, right? Mm-hmm. And so having that well defined up front is important. I wanted to also cover one of the questions in the chat before we move on to benefits realization. What examples would you have where we use creative ways of increasing employee awareness and buy-in? And we'll start with Patrick. Creative ways.
In a lot of ways, every implementation is a little unique. Obviously, we're working around similar systems with people in industries that might span the gamut, and everybody is an individual within those. So sometimes you have to come up with a creative way to really reach a broad audience that might have either different technical capabilities or maybe just a different level of engagement. I've seen something as interesting as a customer literally built a website for their implementation and then shared it out throughout their organization, so there was active visibility of it. I've seen groups do weekly stand-ups where it was every Friday at 9 a.m. they had coffee in a conference room and they talked about the status of their projects, communicated, and had roundtable discussions about each of their individual part and piece of that. And then, I've also just seen people send an email or rely on us to be able to help communicate it. We use several tools to be able to help effectively track your progress, and then provide you access to that so you can see through dashboarding or just reports how the process is going, and then they use that to effectively communicate throughout their team.
Thank you, Patrick. Glenn?
I think it is important for the engagement, to keep the team engaged. I think a lot of this goes back to leadership. For that, I've seen some people, as they get towards the end of their project, they may throw a party and for the team involved. And one company, they had T-shirts made about their implementation, and making it through and things like that. And so I think just, bringing together the team cohesively so that they can feel that they're a part of the change, that they've made an impact on the change. So we've seen different ways that people have done that, whether it be through parties or through T-shirts or whatever. But we've seen, different people do that to engage their team members and keep them engaged in that process.
I remember that picture that they shared, and that was definitely a creative one. And they had their Intacct swag on.
Right.
And the bright green wrist sweatbands and
right.
headbands. That was a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. I'm gonna read a couple of these other chats, Don, before I move on to benefits realization. What was the most pleasant surprise that came from customers in the realm of change management? And so I'm going to add to that. What was the most pleasant surprise that came from, whether it be within the awareness of, what were they aware of the why? What was in it for them? Knowledge. What was the biggest surprise that that was a positive impact. So we'll start with Patrick.
Oh, I've got a couple anecdotal stories. I'll start at the micro and move up to the macro. I think the micro was, you know, we were working through a process with an employee, right, down to the granular level, trying to understand what she was doing on a daily basis. You could just see that she was resigned to her fate. You know, this is horrible, but it's what I'm doing for 20 years. And then she actually started to see the light as we were going towards training in UAT and then go live of, oh, wow, like this is going to get so much easier. That was a really positive change for her. She kind of went from a detractor to one of our biggest product champions at the end of it. And then, you know, at the macro level, you know, I've seen something as easy as, you know, we took an organization that had disjointed systems across multiple locations, and then they started having the ability to like work remotely or work from their phones. And it encouraged a lot of collaboration throughout the organization because now they had a shared environment. You know, that was one of the big ones where you looked at a company that struggled really with a lot of difficulties around separation geographically, and then in the outcome, you know, you work more cohesively in one environment with a cohesive group of people, and everybody kind of felt more connected. We really saw a lot of cross collaboration and a lot of things that happened there that were just a downstream of their efforts.
All right, thank you. Glenn, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think kind of similarly, you know, some of the positive things that you've seen is just, you know, whenever you've improved processes, you know, within a department or within someone's position. I remember one person one time, you know, was shocked that she was finally going to be able to attend her daughter's soccer game. She's never been able to do that before. But since the process was more efficient, she was now able to do that. Or, you know, just as like I said, more macro level, just people realizing they don't have to touch the same document so many times as it goes through the system, you know, because things are more efficient now, and the way that the process flow is more efficient. And so there's just, you know, a lot of changes like that that people are excited about and able to take advantage of. That definitely is a big win for them.
I have a fun one that I just thought about. I have a client that'll go live early next year. They get to literally get rid of 20 years of paper documents. So they're freeing up huge office space that was filing cabinets wall to wall, and they're getting to digitize and move that away. So they're actually opening up more of their building just by doing some change.
What are they going to put in place of the filing cabinets?
I don't know, maybe a break room. We'll see.
All right, we'll move on to benefits realization. So this is where the reinforcement and outcomes come into play. Did the change stick? Did the customer deliver the expected results over time? Did the implementation have that benefits realization? And talk a little bit about the wins and then also the challenges. And we'll start with Glenn.
For me, for the ones that were successful, I think it goes back to leadership again. I keep going back to that. But when you have that direction and that person who's saying, you know, we are going to change, this is our new process, and we're going to go with this process, those will usually stick. People, you know, will get on board, those will go through. And, you know, you see, that's what you see, you know, most of the time, thankfully, as, you know, when people have that type of leadership throughout the project. For those who don't have that type of leadership, and they are, you know, maybe a bit more of a detractor through that, you've seen some people using a new system, but they go back to doing things the old way, which is not as efficient, but that's what they have known, that's what they've done for, you know, a period of time, and so that's what they feel more comfortable with, and so they kind of reverted back and are not using the benefits that you've put in place for efficiency and workflow and what benefits other people down the line. They kind of have disregarded that just for more comfort in what they're used to doing. And those are always tragic to see. So.
All right, thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, I'm gonna piggyback on something Glenn said about the executive leadership and their engagement, and then not just the communication, but the communication has to be that ultimately these changes are to benefit the company and the staff overall, right? When those people see it, they love it. It may not be day one, but usually within 3 to 6 months of the go live, most people have adopted and are really sticking in there and are championing the system. I would really love to hear this is so much better than it used to be, right? And to be fair, there are those instances where you have people that don't like change, right? And people as human beings, we are adverse to change overall. Unfortunately, sometimes you see people who really just do not want to adopt it. Sometimes you see like roles change, right? Like positions change a little bit. But ultimately, I'd like to think that throughout the course of most of these cloud migrations, people are seeing a lot of benefits and adoption more than not. And a lot of that really does boil down to engagement, involvement, and communication.
All right, thank you. We had another question out here that I wanted to hit on, not specific to the benefits realization, but it is around where have we communicated that the change in the process and approach during, so for example, when you're moving to the cloud, where do we communicate that change process and approach, and how did we reinforce that? And I'll kind of get the conversation started here. So in the prior slide where we showed the implementation timeline and where those ADKAR milestones were, those would be opportune times where you would want to align your strategic communication approach. And so that communication needs to start early in the process with your core team, of course, because you want your core team to be aware of the why and the purpose and get them aligned. And then of course, distribute that communication plan and maybe tone it to the next level of middle managers. So just to getting the conversation started. So what has your experience been with successes where that communication was done on the client side, and then what areas were there gaps and potential opportunities to do it better? And we'll start with Glenn.
Whenever I think about the processes and ones that are successful, as we talk about kind of that first kind of engagement that is very necessary, that workflow, the processes that is very necessary. I'll just say occasionally, I said it's always good to have that done before an implementation, and sometimes, as we mentioned, people don't have the skills in-house to do that. And that, as I mentioned, that's something that we often help with, but sometimes that's an engagement before the implementation happens to say, we know we have an issue with our processes. We need to identify and maybe map out what our current state is, what our future state needs to be. For that helps. You're getting the teams together at that time prior to even the implementation to recognize what the current processes are and how they can be improved internally for that. And then a lot of times that's documented, like a business process review or something that's documented in the system for the organization, so that then can be used to benefit their implementation for that. And that sometimes cuts down on some of that initial discovery that has to be done. If it's some of that has already been, some of that translates into that. But it definitely helps kind of have a clear guide, or a point that you're going towards, so everybody kind of knows where you're headed for that. In those instances, there's always that clear understanding of, this is where we're headed, this is where we're going for that. And that usually always is a successful project whenever you have those, someone's taken the time to really understand their own company and the different processes in their own company. And like we've said, whenever that doesn't happen, and then there's risk involved with the process, and as we also mentioned, sometimes not having that in place, or those even a future state, a diagram or something that they can use. Not having those things in place can sometimes, be detrimental to the implementation or get someone off track of what they originally were going towards, moving towards. So, you've seen kind of a bit of both of those, but whenever you have a clear path and you have that leadership kind of driving towards that, then it's usually a successful implementation.
Yeah, and that's definitely where you would see, going through that exercise, where you would see those silos
Right.
through that end-to-end process. And those silos are opportune areas where you can increase that automation and workflow between departments.
Right.
Patrick, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like this kind of communication needs to happen before you've even started looking at a solution.
Going back to that beginning slide where you get that core team and process defined. Yep.
Yeah, I think you use like July 1 as an example of a date for that.
I did.
You need to be having this conversation in January of the same year. You need to be starting to think about, what do I want to do long term, before you start trying to solution a platform or around it. So that when you get to the point of trying to find a solution, or even far before you get to an implementation, you have a cohesive understanding of what are my goals as an organization. And that's collaborative too, right? It doesn't always have to be a broadcast communication. Sometimes it can be very collaborative within, what do you guys want to do? Where do you see opportunities for this, right? Definitely leverage your subject matter experts within the organization to give you those insights. And in some cases, it's not even a question around where do we want to go. I think even the poll is a good indication, right? As a society, we're moving towards the cloud, right? So sometimes it's not even where does the business want to go, where is my industry going, where is, the vast majority of technology moving towards. Those kind of conversations are only going to benefit you downstream, so that you're not trying to do it ad hoc.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Patrick. In the timeline that I was showing, that was starting the actual implementation, but the prequel to that timeline was the months put into the effort to go through that alignment with stakeholder, with the leadership, and with the core team, and then of course that vendor selection, and that often takes several months to get through that process before that kickoff. So there was a part that you weren't seeing before that actual kickoff of the implementation project. I've got another question here from Don. I think we have enough time, Don, to cover this last chat question before we open up Q&A. Have you ever seen examples of great communication around benefits realization? It's specifically as it related to the comment around celebrations, and how did those use cases, how did the client or did not roll into the benefits that came out of that? So for example, consolidated reporting or time saved, did they highlight or communicate that as a part of their celebration initiatives? We'll start with Glenn.
Yes, we have seen whenever a team is engaged throughout the process for that. A lot of times what we see is the time to close. What used to take them maybe half a month or three weeks to close, they can now do in just a couple of days. So that's usually some of those kind of milestones that is very common to see throughout the process. Another one, as I mentioned, just the increase expedited workflows that are able to happen, whether it's through an approval process or something like that, so that the time to pay vendors may be greatly reduced, or the time to receive payments may be greatly reduced by implementing different AR practices. So those are usually some of the things that examples that you can see from clients, that they may reiterate after once they've gone fully live and started really benefiting from the changes that were made.
Yeah, that's great. And I just thought of a creative way to even add to the picture with the t-shirts and the swag gear. They could hold up like posters in their picture and
Yeah.
have like, time, we close in 3 days,
Right.
so we could further um communicate those benefit realizations actually in the celebration more visibly. Patrick?
I actually have a very unique scenario that I think is a great thing for everybody in the call to think about. I actually have a client right now who is making that a portion of their implementation. They are using the new solution to find ways to recognize employees that maybe were like falling through the cracks, but we're still superstars, right? So we're helping them find ways to use the system to build KPIs to celebrate those people that are maybe like the undersung heroes, guys in receiving and shipping who are making orders go out the door. Um, those people who are doing outbound sales, but you don't see it until we close the deal, right? Um, they're actually using the platform as a solution to celebrate the solution, if that makes sense, by celebrating the employees that are really making an impact within the organization.
Like it. Good stuff. I think we're ready for our last poll question.
You're right. This is the last poll question. So, would your organization have a need for any of the following LBMC tech solutions and services? We offer managed IT, network security, intelligent automation, and low-code applications. We also have a talented team around CRM and CXM software. And we've, for many, many years, done custom app development. And the most fundamental communication tool of them all, your phone system. We can help with that as well. All right. I'm not going to share the results of this particular poll question, but I will be giving it a couple more moments before closing it down. All right. We've come to the Q&A.
All right, so this is the part where we want to just open it up to the audience and get your questions in the chat that you have for us, and we'll take as many as we can in the next 5 minutes. And if we don't get to it, we will we'll put it in the parking lot, and we'll definitely be in touch with you with a response. So please chat away. We'll give folks a minute, no more than 30 seconds, and then we can move on with some additional questions that we already had backlogged.
Very good. Why don't you get started on those? I don't see any. Wait. Here's one. Can we get a copy of the key slides? Yes, I will be sending out following the webinar. Give me 24 hours. A link to the recording, a copy of the slides, and a link to the survey. So Jenny, I'm going to turn it back to you. I don't see anything else there.
Okay. I'm going to go with first question. I'm ready to get started on my move to the cloud. What is the next step? And I'll let Patrick take that one.
You know, probably the best step would be to have a conversation with Glenn or I, or both together, to really help you figure out what the process might look like, and we can get you aligned with a sales resource so that we can kind of help you not just try to build a plan, but maybe start looking at some solutions that we can provide. And that all starts with that conversation. We need to know you and your business a little bit better before we can really start to help you down that path and that journey to the cloud. And of course, we're always happy to do that. Throw it in there that it's free consultation, right? Where we can have that conversation. But it really is the first step to your journey to the cloud, is have a conversation with somebody that can really help you see what that process might look like.
And on the screen right now, you see our email address, info@lbmctech.com. If you are ready to take that next step, please use that email and we will coordinate a time, as Patrick mentioned, to get you hooked up with the right experts. And we don't want to make any recommendations before we understand what's going on in your business, as he pointed out.
Yep, your journey is definitely unique to you, so definitely a great first step. Do you have anything to add to that, Glenn?
No, not really. I think that is key for that. And then, of course, as we mentioned, you know, just kind of finding out or determining in your organization what that looks like, what that means, who needs to be involved in that. So going ahead and kind of having that awareness discussions or talking that out within your organization would be something that you would want to be doing as well.
Yeah. And I'll add to that too, you know, as a part of that discussion too, if you're needing additional change management resources to help you kind of through that human side of the change, so we can, during that discovery and planning process, develop a strategic approach to that training management portion that will be integrated to your overall plan. Let us know that as well. We want to be talking about that portion of your overall strategy sooner versus later, in parallel with that technology discovery. All right, Dawn, I'll hand it back to you.
Well, great. I'd like to thank Jenny, as well as our panelists, Glenn and Patrick. And I want to thank our audience for taking time out of your day to spend with us today to talk about this really important aspect. I mean, it's not applicable just to ERP changes, but change management is really key to paving the way to the culture that you and results that you want your organization to have. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you in the future at another LBMC Technology Solutions webinar. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Bye.